All right. Well, welcome back. This is a part of a series of videos where I'm looking at the data analysis from 2022 US Medical Residency Match from National Residency Matching Program or NRMP. And I've looked at previously the published data on the characteristics of the USMD seniors and foreign graduates overall in the matching program, differences between successfully matched and unmatched residents or candidates, and you can find them on my YouTube channel. But today I will be looking at what is called a program director survey. So every other year, NRMP does a survey of the program directors who have participated in the match to find out details about how they look at applications, what educational characteristics or personal characteristics they are inspired by when they are ranking these candidates or selecting them for interviews and so on and so forth. This is done every other year. It's used to be done every even year, so 2018, 2020, and so on and so forth. But they had to skip 2020 due to pandemic, and this is a 2021 survey data that has been published. And the primary purpose is to characterize factors that program director used to select applicants, to interview and rank applicants for the main residency match. And this is done in the 11 days between when the rank order list has been certified and cannot be changed and the start of a match week. So there is 11 days of a gap in there where all the data has been submitted so that there is no influence on the respondents' answers by the match outcome. So they don't know who they're going to get yet. The survey typically gets information about number of applications received, screened, reviewed, frequency, which programs interview, and rank specific applicant groups, test scores, characteristics, outcome in interviews. And this year in 2021, they had a lot of question about virtual recruitment that they have published separately as a separate outcome. We may look at that data later on. I'm not sure how useful that data will be in future, although some programs may continue to use a combination of in-person and virtual interviews. Because the virtual recruitment experience, they wanted to study that, they had to delete some items so that the survey does not become any longer. And they deleted some of those questions related to specific target scores, whether programs are offering more interview than the slots they have because of potential cancellations, time allowed for applicants to respond to interview invitations, scheduling of interviews, post-match or SOAP, supplementary offer acceptance program participation or communication, and importance of some other factors. Now, this may be reintroduced in the future. These data may be available for 2018. I may go back and look at it, but I'm not sure how useful that will be at this stage. And let's look at the data what we have this time. So overall response rate was about 23.3% or about 1,000 plus program directors replied of all specialties together. This is a pretty good number. Most journal surveys have a response rate of a little over 15%, so 15, 16, 18% of a response rate, because when you send it to 100 people, actually 10,000 or more people randomly, without any formal commitment from them in the beforehand, you expect some of these surveys will be ignored, some may not be read, some of these emails will be deleted, go to junk boxes, and people are busy. So 23.3% actually pretty good response on this kind of a general cold calling of survey. What they did was that those specialties that where there were more than 10 program directors who responded, which were 20, they are giving their characteristics separately, and all others were then combined with less than 10 responding program directors. And that is done because the data becomes less accurate at less than 10 responses. And there's also some concerns for unblinding that they want to potentially avoid. Now, as you know, that I am focusing mostly on neurology because I want to make all of you a neurologist. And fortunately, in neurology, we have 20 plus responders. So 154 neurology program directors received survey invitation and 29 responded, which is a response rate of 19%, slightly below average as compared to some other specialties. For example, OBGYN, 32.7% response rate and 28.9% response rate in emergency medicine. So this is a little unfortunate, but at least it's still a relatively useful data. As I said, anything more than 15% is a pretty decent and expected journal response rate on a cold survey. Now, what they have done is that the questions they were asking about the candidates, they have divided those questions into two characteristic groups. One is what they're calling educational and academic performance characteristics, which include grades, test scores, medical school accreditation status, reputation of applicants' medical school and so on. And the other one they grouped into personal characteristics, such as perception of applicants' commitment to their specialty, ethics and professionalism, ranking factors, program interview, their experience with applicants, and so on and so forth. And we will look at these questions in detail. As I said, we will look at the data overall for all specialties combined. And then either in the same video, if it's not too long, or in a separate video, I will look at neurology specifically, which is of my main primary interest. So let's dig through the number. So all specialties total, 1,033 program directors who have responded. And this is figure one, in which is looking at a summary of program interviewing and ranking activities. So mean number of applications received, mean, and interview invitations given, interviews done, and applicants ranked. So 9 programs are separated out, or 9 applicants or positions on average have been separated out for a quota, that there is something that is pre-decided or preordained, so it's not a random event. Applications received, now I am presuming here this is the number of applications received per program on average. And if that is true, then it is a remarkably high number of 1,013. Now this quota may mean number of seats they had. So let's presume that, because I couldn't find it in this document. Maybe there's a supplement or index at the end. But let's say that the 9 seats is the average program size, which might be true. And for these 9 seats, we're getting 1,013. So more than 100 application for each seat allocation. I'm presuming this is true. I have not been able to verify it. But let's say if 1,000 applications are received, then applications that are rejected based on a standardized screen. Now, that standardized screen may be that they need to have a certain element in the application to even review it. So, for example, a program will not look at an application if step 2 score is missing, step 2 CK. And if that's the case, then they will just reject it. They will not look at this application. And usually program has written that on their website. So it helps, because it seems like based on the survey, it's true that program follow their standardized screen, and you'll just wasting money, because they're not going to even look at your application. So 506 applications out of 1,013 are rejected. Applications that are receiving a holistic view, meaning their application was fully opened up, reviewed, and looked at for all the component, was 423, a little less than 506. Maybe there was some additional element that were not part of standardized screen that made them not look through the whole application. Then 249 interviews, applicants were invited for interview out of these 423, and actual interviews after these, based some may not have received it, some may refuse it, and so on and so forth. But the final applicants interviewed was 112. So the 112, if we go by my original assumption, that there are 9 seats on average, that means that a little above 10, maybe almost 11 candidates interviewed. Actually, yeah, at least 11 or maybe 12 applicants interviewed for each position available. And then out of those 112, 101 were ranked, meaning that another 11 performed not so well, or there was some other thing missing in their application, meaning that they were hoping to get back by the time they were ranked. And if that information was not available, or the applicant withdrew, applicant took a pre-match, or applicant sent an email that I want to withdraw, or they canceled their ACGME application, or so on and so forth, everything included in there. 11 out of those 112 are not ranked, and 101 are ranked. So 101 ranked for a 9 position is almost like 11 applicant ranked for each position, if that is true. Now, that may not be true, and I will have to go back, or you will have to dig through the document to see how many seats on average we're talking about for these application characteristics. So this was figure 1. Let's look at figure 2. And figure 2 becomes more a summary of this particular number here, application received versus application rejected. And what they're saying that about 45% of the applications are rejected based on a standardized screen, and 55 or 54% of the applications receive a holistic view. And we just looked at it in the main figure 1. Figure 3 now gives a summary of program interview and ranking activities. So basically the question is, what percentage of programs are interviewing a particular type of candidate? And they have divided candidates into MD candidates, which are US medical school applicants, the DO candidates, and then international medical graduates, which they have further divided into US international medical graduates and non-US international medical graduates. The green color means that they often interview. So 93% of the program are saying that they often interview an MD senior or a fourth year medical school student, MD school. 6% seldom interview, and 1% of the respondents, and here the respondent is 902 applicants, 1% do not interview ever a US MD senior. And the most likely explanation is that the MD applicants are not applying to this program. It may be a very new program that have just started, and they have not received any MD senior application. I'm going to skip on DO senior and MD grads or DO grads because we have not looked at that data in prior videos, and just focus on international medical graduates. So out of international medical graduates, US medical graduates are looked at by 26% of the program often and 54% seldom, while 19% of the program never look at a US citizen international medical graduate. And I'm presuming they will also likely never look at non-US international medical graduate. And there could be many reasons. It could be just that the applicants from MD seniors are so competitive that they do not have the ability to go down that far in the list to interview, to invite for interview in international medical graduates because the application is just not at par. This becomes slightly worse for non-US citizen international medical graduates, and now the programs are only 16% that are often interviewing them, and 35% who never interview them. And again, this 35 probably includes 19% for the additional program that never interview non-US international medical graduates. And again, there could be many variable reasons which are not explained here. We may be able to see some of that later on in some of the applicant characteristics, but I doubt this will be broken up any significantly. And I will assume a lot of this is because of just competitiveness of the applicant, that the USMD senior is just so competitive that it's hard for them to even look at non-US graduates for review of the application. Moving forward, let's look at next figure 4, which is now looking at percentages of the programs that are using USMLE to select either USMD senior, so fourth year student from USMD school, or an IMG applicant for interview. And now we have 1,011 people who responded out of the 1,033 responding to the interview and answered this question. Now, let's look at the USMLE Step 1 score for USMD applicant. And Step 1 score is required to reach a certain target for their application to be looked at by 38% of the programs. So that's a very decent number. Nearly half, or 40%, of the programs are not even looking at the application if it is not reaching a certain Step 1 score. Now, this will not be any significant factor in the future, as the Step 1 score will not be available after one more year, and this will not be a factor anymore. And then there is another 21% who prefer to have a certain target score but do not require it, meaning that most of the people who are below that target score, they will not look at, but there will be few exceptions and they don't have a hard line on a step score. So if you add that to the 38%, now it's almost like 60% or 59% that have a very significant reliance on a step 1 score. Now, in contrast, the step 2 score is relied even more, but here now the hard line has been softened. So only 27% of the programs say that they have to have a target score, while majority program, 41%, say that they do not have a required target score, but they do prefer for score to be above a certain cutoff. But if you add them together, that's now 68% of the programs that prefer to see a certain score on step 2 for the application to be reviewed and an applicant invited for the interview. Now, step 2 CS is of less significance, only 5% required to have certain characteristic, let's say must pass in first attempt or something like that. Step 3 is even less significant. 77% of the program are saying that they do not consider whether a step 3 score is available or what the score is. Now, in contrast, with a US applicant, let's look at the foreign graduates, and the numbers look slightly worse, although to be honest, not that much worse. Programs in general are requiring step 1 score, and now step 1 score is 43% that require a certain target as compared to 38%, pretty close, very slight difference. and 37% requiring it in step two, which is, I know, slightly worse again than the 27% of the um, USMD senior applicants. Now, CS is becoming a little more significant. 10% are saying that they need to see something on the CS. And step three, again, is not a significant percent. Still 66% of the programmers saying they don't care about the step three score. And, another 8% saying that they require pass only. So, that is, again, three-fourths of the applicants. So, in general, I will say about 60% of the program are looking at step one and step two scores, and many of them are requiring a certain target score for interview application consideration, interview invitation consideration, and but in CS and step three, that is not much of a problem. All right, let's go down and look at next figure. So figure 5 is again looking at percentage of program using licensure exam to select DO applicants. I'm going to actually skip that because I have not looked at the DO data at all before or now. I have never had any involvement with the DO school, so I will not understand how to look or correlate this data. But just know that that exists, and if it applies to you, you're welcome to go and look at this data. Program 6, program ranking behavior, figure 6, percentage of programs ranking candidates by applicant type. So if you are foreign graduate or MD school graduate or DO school, will you be ranked or not ranked? So let's look at the program. 960 programs have replied to this question, and 96% of the programs are ranking an MD school candidate applicant. 1% are not, and 1% are probably the one that are not getting any application from the USMD seniors. Again, skipping DO and grad student data. Again, the grad basically means that they're not in the fourth year anymore. They have already graduated from the MD school, so they should have been in the last year's match, but they're late in the match by a year because of either catch-up reasons or other reasons that I will not go into. Now, looking at the foreign graduates, international medical graduates, in the US medical graduates, about 18% of the program have never ranked any US IMG, and 30% of the program have never ranked any non-US citizen IMG. But that means that most of the program are ranking citizens, so that means that foreign graduates, so let's say that 82% of the programs have ranked US international medical graduates, while as almost 70% of the program have ranked non-US citizen international medical graduates. All right, going to the next figure here. So looking at figure I1, and now we are looking at this beautiful table, which is basically how many respondents from this 1,000+ program directors said that a certain education or academic performance characteristic is important or valuable or interesting for them to look at. And they are now listed in the order of um, responsiveness or responses, positive responses. So the top of the list is USMLE Step 1 score, and 86% of the program directors are saying that they think or they look at or they feel that the Step 1 score is important. Now, this is very interesting because it makes me pause and wonder that how much of program directors' involvement was in the decision to do away with Step 1 score. It's strange that something that was thought to be so important and valuable for a program director to look at when inviting interviews for candidate, they will say, oh yeah, let's just get rid of it. So the second question that stems from here is that doing away with step one score, what will increase in value in terms of reliance on as a characteristic for invitation to the interview? And based on what the data we have looked so far, the step two score was already important, but I would worry and wonder they will become even more important, even more significant. And then some of the factors down the list here I will point out, which I think will become even more important, valuable, and some are already very important, valuable. So anyways, let's go down the list. So step one score is top of the list in terms of the factor important for educational performance of a student when they are trying to decide on interview application or ranking of a candidate. And right next to it is the Medical School Performance Evaluation, or MSPE. Now, of course, MSPE is not going away. So that means that the step one score loss will make even more stress on MSPE as a significant document. And now this is not part of this analysis here, but um, um, if I guess, or if I do a premonition, my concern is that the segment in MSPE that talks about your specific specialty that you're applying to might become very useful or important for a program director. So if you're applying to neurology, then the component in your MSPE that talks about the neurology clerkship, which is usually a summary evaluation, that by a clerkship director or will become a very, very useful tool for the program directors to look at when trying to decide uh, for inviting for interview and for ranking. Now, the problem that I see with that is that in general, we are very nice, and in general, we say very good things about our student. And that will make it hard for this data to be used by program directors to figure out who is a better candidate than other. Remember, in the end, it is a competition where they're trying to rank people in the order of their preference on who should come to our program. And for that, they have to use something. Now, although they would try to read too much into MSPE, it will not have a positive benefit because there will be so many good MSPE recommendations of the students, but it will become unnecessarily a negative tool, not an inclusion criteria, but an exclusion criteria, meaning that if you have so many, if 95% of the people have great remarks on MSPE, if there are 5% students who have a poor remark, and many of them maybe because of just a poor experience with the clerkship, maybe because of a poor medical school, maybe because of some other hardships, but that will now stand out as a red flag or as a sore thumb or something bad for the program directors because if everybody else is getting great remarks, they cannot use it. But then they will say, well, why this person doesn't have a great remark like everybody else? So my long-winded comment, but remember these are my takeaways from this data that you're watching, and you're welcome to skip it. Step two score, as I mentioned, will become even more important. It was already very important. 78.8% of the responders said that this is important in deciding whom to interview. So this is not yet ranking, but it's close. It's whom to interview. Grades in required clerkships. So that will become more important because MSP is already at 86%, but grades in clerkship was down at 75%, and I can see that jumping up in the list here. And in the terms of percentage responsiveness, that your grade in your clerkship might become very valuable. And we can have a separate discussion on how clerkships are graded, and I can make a video on that and give my impression on what what thought process goes behind grading during a clerkship. Now, one worry I have there that MSPE traditionally has been a weak point for many foreign medical graduates or international medical graduates, and grades in their clerkship may be missing for a lot of people. I know when I did neurology, there was no grade. It was that, whether you attended or not, or was it satisfactory or bad, there was no detailed grade. So if I was applying now, and I was an international medical graduate at IMG years ago, if I was applying now and I didn't have a step one score, which helped me, I had a really high step one score, then I would really struggle because of having a very poor MSPE and very poor grade. I was probably one of the earliest students which forced the program to issue an MSPE because my program did not have a habit. They was just issuing a dean's letter, which was the same template for everyone, by the way. So I had to force them to create an MSPE for me and some of other friends who were applying, and just again, long story, maybe not of interest to you. Any failed attempt at USMLE is already 74% important, will become even more important because step one score is now pass and fail. Class ranking or quartile is already important, but will probably become even more important. Grades in clerkship, not overall, but in the preferred specialty. So previous grades in clerkship was all the required clerkship grades, but now this is very specific clerkship grade for the preferred specialty, like you're applying for neurology. And this is the one that I think will become really important. And the comments there will become important, which typically go on to MSPE. And then consistency grades, honors, again, Right now, it's only 55% people think that this is important for inviting for interview, but I worry this will become very much more important with the lack of step one score. And then other factors become less and less important. I think one factor here that often people worry about is gaps in their medical education, especially international medical graduates. And this is already considered important by nearly half of the people or program directors. Medical school reputation, and surprisingly, this is considered important for inviting for interview by 38%. But I'm not sure if this data is complete, because if a program director is saying that they consider medical school reputation as important in consideration to decide on who to invite for interview, next question I would ask from them that, okay, well, let's say you invited 10 people for interview. How many of those 10 you thought their medical school was reputable or important? Was it one of those 10s or two of those 10s or five of those 10s? And I think that number is probably low. And I think this is probably less of a value for international medical graduates. But one way that a school builds a reputation with a certain program is through their previous graduates. So let's say I went into a residency program. I did my residency at University of Nebraska Medical Center, and UNMC had a good impression of me. Now, the program director who took me as a resident will think more of those applicants who are coming from King Edward Medical School or University, where I came from. So the definition of medical school reputation is also unclear, and it may be reputation just based on their past experiences of the previous graduate from the same school, not in the sense that, okay, who has published more. Of course, there are IB schools, but how many are there, or how many candidates a program might get from that school? And then, as we have seen before in the general questions, the step three score is not considered very valuable, and it's not. In some many programs just say, oh, they just have passed it is enough for them, because see, step three score is designed to test someone after their first year of residency. So you're supposed to have taken step three towards the end of first year of residency after you have had some exposure to the clinical practice, but um, and I can say more things about step three, but maybe in another video. All right, let's moving on to the next figure here. The next figure, I2, now takes all of the same factors that where a percentage of program directors are saying that these are important for them. And the next question they're asking them, okay, how important on a scale of 1 to 5? 5 will be extremely important, and let's say 1 is not that important. And now trying to give some weightage to this. And this is interesting because now things change slightly. That although a lot of people said that the step one score is very important to look at, the actual weightage given to that score is actually not that high. It's kind of in between all the scores. Let me move my picture here. So, you will see that the scores range anywhere from 3.2 as the lowest, and 4.4 as the highest, and it's kind of in the middle between the two, slightly on the higher side, but not as important as it looked on the previous table or graph. Now, MSPE now becomes even more valuable. So if you multiply the percentage of program directors saying that this is important with the actual weightage or how important they say it is, you will see that MSPE is still already leading a step one score significantly. And so MSPE overall, in terms of weighted balance, seems to be far more important or slightly more important than step one score. Step two score is again 3.8, and I think if you multiply the percentages, might even be more important than step one already. And again, step one score is going away. Grades in the required clerkship, again, high weightage, 3.9. Anything around 4 will be very important for me. So 3.9, 4, anything above 3.7 really will mean that this is something that is considered very important by those program directors who look at it. Failed attempt at USMLE 3.9, 4.4. So this is the highest scoring factor, matched by failed attempt at Comlex USA, which is for DO students, and it's the same thing. So any failed attempt on the licensing exam is considered extremely significant, and the most significant factor in deciding who to call for interview. Again, deciding whom to interview. We're not at ranking yet. And then other importance are grades in clerkship in the preferred specialty, 4.1. 3.9 will be consistency of grades. And then 4.2 is medical school accreditation status. So again, this is kind of like reputation, but reputation now is below it at 3.7. And although in percentage program director's response, the reputation and accreditation status were about the same. Again, accreditation was slightly important, more important than reputation, but now it's becoming more important here that if your school is not accredited, then the chances of you being invited to an interview becomes less. Now, this is becoming even more important as the accreditation by World Federation of Medical Education is becoming more strict, and there are many countries and many schools who might struggle with keeping up with accreditation status, and this factor might again become even more important in future interviews and might actually be a requirement to apply for USMLE starting 2023, I believe. All right, and things that are not that weighted are step three scores, like we have looked at before. So no surprise there. All right, now we come to the personal characteristics. So we looked at the educational characteristic of an applicant. Now let's look at personal characteristics of these applicant. And the top of the list is letters of recommendation in specialty. So if you're applying for neurology, do you have letters of recommendation in neurology? Who has written them? What is written in them? This is considered by most of the program director as is a significant factor. Now we'll look at the weightage later on down in the next table or figure how much weightage, but most program director, 85% or highest number, are saying that this is something that they give value to when deciding whom to interview. Personal statement overall, so not any component of it, again considered by most of the program director. Diversity of the characteristics is important. People want to now have a very diverse group of resident from various backgrounds, various interests, and so on and so forth. So this is very promising. I think having a diverse residents will strengthen a program and bring more creativity and innovation. Perceived commitment to specialty. So this is very important that the word is perceived. Can you come across to say that you really want to do neurology? And I've always believed as this to be the single most important factor in going into neurology. And at least for inviting for interview, program directors are ranking it as fourth most important factor. Now, this again is interesting to me. Most people have challenges in their application where they have had some struggle. And here, if you can tell them that you have overcome those significant obstacles, and although there are things that look bad on your application, but you have done something where you can show that you are over it and you have done much better. So I'll give you an example. Obvious example will be a low step one score, but a very high step two score. Now, this is considered to be an important factor in deciding who to invite for interview. So this is interesting. I would not have guessed that this will be something this valuable, but let's see what weightage it gets later on. Professionalism and ethics, of course, perceived interest in program, very high. I'm a little doubtful on this point because this is natural for anyone coming in for interview to tell you or applying to your program to tell you that they are very interested. Now this is being looked at to decide who to interview. Now how do you convey with your application how interested you are in a program when you are interviewing at 15 different programs, right? And you're applying to 50 or 100 different programs. So this is very interesting. I'm surprised that this is considered important for deciding whom to interview. Leadership qualities, again, I'm not sure how they judge that in an application. So I'm surprised by these two comments, perceived interest and leadership, and also a little surprised by the overcoming significant obstacle comment here, response here. And then of course, volunteer extracurricular experience is considered important. I'm not sure what weightage. Prior knowledge of applicant by to the program. So program have already seen the applicant as a student, which is most common, or as an observer, which will be the only other option, or as a researcher, I guess, and is considered also by a lot of programs and other life experiences. And then it really drops from there. And let's look at the list. Audition or electives or rotation in program director's department is not that valuable. Involvement and interest in research is not that valuable. Ability to work legally without visa no, it is considered look important by about 40% of the program. And remember, these are might be the 40% who do not rank non-US citizen IMGs, as we have looked at before. Visa status is again is almost the same thing, but again, this will be that if someone is on a visa versus not on a visa versus what kind of visa. Fluency in language of patient population is 31%. So, of course, English will be the primary language everywhere, but I'm assuming here that some programs are looking at your expertise in Hispanics or other languages. Uh, NRMP flag for match violation is considered important by only 27.8%, maybe because it's not a common phenomenon. Interest in academic career, again, not very much people are looking for academicians. They don't care. They're going to train clinicians. And OA rotation specialty elsewhere is only important by 18.9% of the program. So I know a lot of medical school students, MD students here in US worry about not having an OA rotation if they're applying for a certain specialty, but is not that important. Less than 20% of the program look at it. Now let's look at the weightage of all of these factors, and let's see what surprises we have. So mean importance of the personal characteristics. So letter of specialty recommendations are really important. So 4.2, high weightage, very close to top weightages here. And let me see if I can make it smaller so it's less bothersome. Good. So 4.2 letters of recommendation, which was the one factor being looked at by most people in deciding whom to interview. And let's look at what others are close to or higher than this. The highest, of course, is the NRMP flag for match violation. Not many programs look at it or thought it worth looking at, but when they do, then it is very, very valuable to them. And then professionalism and ethics is considered to be very valuable to them. And the perceived commitment to specialty, are you going to be a neurologist or not, which I thought was very important. And I think now I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if you multiply uh, these weightages by all of these percentages for each one of them, the highest score that comes out might be for the perceived commitment to specialty. And I might do it later on. I don't want to do it live here in the video recording, but I might later on do this just for my personal interest and satisfaction. And I might be right that if you multiply the weighted of how important it is with how many think it is important, then you might get the high score for perceived commitment to specialty. But anyways, having overcome significant obstacles is also important. 4.1 for and perceived interest in program is important. Leadership quality is important. A lot of these things are important, but again, aware rotation is not very important, and interest in academic career is not very important, or fluency in that language patient population is not very important because we have interpreter, we have translator, we have it for patients because not no person can speak every language that people in US speak. I've had patients who speak all kind of strangest language, sometimes even hard to find the right interpreter because the language is so uncommon. This is a melting pot of a country, so we are delighted to have that. Now, ranking. So we looked at all of these factors on how important they are when considering for interview, and now once you have interviewed, how correct important these educational factors are for whom to rank. And step one score still stays at the top. MSP stays at the top, CQ score stays at the top, class quartile and ranking stays at the top, but start dropping. These first three really seems to have the most significant. More than 50% program directors are thinking this is significant and important, and they look at it, and everything else drops there quite a lot. Failure time as USMLE, of course, almost 50%. Let's look at grades in clerkship, and especially you looking for now for ranking. Now, these were important for inviting for interviews, right? But once that you have been interviewed, then for ranking, maybe more focuses on the interview itself, and this become less of an important things. And really on step three scores, virtual rotation handling, and so on and so forth, medical school reputation and accreditation status, all of these becomes less important because now you as a person is more important than any of these things. Now, let's see if we have weightages for all of these factors again for ranking. And again, we have the weightages. And again, step one score has about the same weightage, 3.8 compared to 3.7 before, slightly more weightage for MSP 4. And again, if you multiply the score of 4 with the 61.3% of MSP might be the highest score important number if you combine the two. The highest score importance here, which is important looking at, is fail attempt on USMLE. Has a very big weightage on ranking. as expected, and Complex USA, which might be the same thing. Medical school accreditation status is very important for ranking, and this will become absolutely important because you may not be even be able to apply if you do not have an accredited school. But already program directors were looking at this as an important factor. What else is more important than 3.1 on weighting? Step 2 score, class ranking, uh, grades in preferred clerkship. And again, this may become even more important as the step 1 go away. As I said, MSPE grades in clerkship will might take place of step 1 score as something that will be looked at by program directors. And continuous medical education without gaps is important unless you explain it away as an obstacle, and that seems to be very important in personal characteristics. Jumping on to the personal characteristics for ranking, and here interpersonal skills is really taking the day here. 87% of the program director. And see, it's interesting when we were looking at whom to invite for interview, then the academic characteristics were clearly beating. So these factors were far more important as compared to personal characteristics, which were overall less important. But here, now the odds have flipped. Now, academic characteristics is becoming significantly less important, and the personal characters have become significantly more important. So, interpersonal skills, interactions with faculty during interview, feedback from current residents who are looking at you. So these, are kind of like faculty feedback, interaction with house staff. So the first four is just about interaction. The first one is your overall skill. The second one is faculty's impression of you. The third is residents' impression of you. And fourth is the house staff impression of you. So really, these first four factors are basically, how you interact and how you behave. And it becomes really, really, really important on ranking, far more important than step 1, step 2 score and other characteristics. Diversity is still important. Perceived commitment to specialty is still important. Letters now becoming less important, really taking fifth place here as compared to our previous one. Perceived interest in program is important, and personal statements and all of those that we previously saw become less and less important. And really, away rotation in specialty, not significant. Second interview or visit, really not significant. And facility visa status becoming much less important now in terms of ranking, except for maybe those programs who never rank a US graduate. They probably never invite for interview anyway. So that if you're not been invited by 40% of program for interview, then of course they will not be answering this question on whom to rank. Now, weightages, 4.8, 4.8, 4.6, and 4.8, all on this interaction. So really, the ranking is heavily impacted by how you come across on the day of interview. And that is something that was my impression and most people's impression once you have been invited for interview. Once somebody told me that once you have been invited for interview, you're all about equal. You consider yourself among peer, your performance probably on paper have been about the same or close. But now you really have to shine yourself. Can you interact? Can you communicate? Can you handle interactions? And so on and so forth. So these are really, really important four factors in terms of being ranked as program directors are explaining. Diversity still remains important above 4. Perceived commitment to specialty still 4.4. Although it was really, really good and important for being invited for interview, it takes second place to interpersonal skills in terms of being ranked for the program. Professionalism ethics are important. Again, this may be more of an exclusion rule versus inclusion. NRMP flag becomes very important for ranking. Again, it may be more of an exclusion rather than an inclusion factor. And leadership qualities, again, that will be part of also interpersonal communication skill. And again, prior knowledge of the applicant, again, that will be that the applicant will be at ease, and faculty and residents and house staff will be at ease with that applicant. And that seems to be some factor here. Very good. So this was an overall impression, as I said before, that if the video is too long, which it is, then I will stop here at review of the overall characteristics of all specialties put together, and then I will be recording a separate video reviewing just the data on neurology, which is my primary responsibility as a neurology clerkship director in my specialty, and something that I feel comfortable with discussing. And data in other specialties is available. This is a publicly available database You can go to NRMP website and get access to this. That's where I got it from. It's not a data I own, and I'm just giving you my take and interpretation of the data when I look at it, and take it with a grain of salt. And thank you for joining.